How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to another edition of the Stupid Questions podcast. Today is a very special episode for me because the person I will be interviewing is Carl Wilkins. He is a family member, and he is also the only American to have stayed in Rwanda during the Rwandan Genocide of 1994, where hundreds of thousands, and it is even speculated that millions of people were slaughtered. And he has, obviously, for many reasons, a very compelling story. And we dive into a number of different topics, which I'm sure is no shock to you guys. But I hope that this is just a really good episode. If you are looking to jump ahead to hear specifically more about kind of the context and story for the Rwandan genocide and how he experienced it from day one, you can jump through literally to about an hour, 59 minutes after the intro. And you can do that. Prior to that, we do talk about a lot of really good things, obviously drawing a lot of the context for who Carl is and the person he has become over many years. The whole conversation is about 2 hours long, and I loved every minute of it. I teared up and cried, actually, at one point for, again, probably obvious reasons, but I won't say too much. Just hope you guys really enjoy it. And again, thank you so much for being here. Here's Carl Wilkins. Well, first off, I guess I'll have already introduced people to you in an intro, so I won't go into all of that per se, but I do want to thank you for taking the time to jump on here. I guess for a little bit more context for people listening, Carl is I guess we call you Uncle Carl. By blood to my wife, you are second cousin, I believe.
Her dad's my cousin.
Yes, so... I've gotten to know you over the years and spend lots of time, and it's been an honor. And obviously, you have a very unique story, so we're gonna get to jump into some of that stuff. But I typically have people on who are in the endurance world or business world, sometimes in the music world, because those are like really pique my interest. But with you,
it's all three.
It's all three. Yeah. It like it builds them all into one thing. No, the mindset I think that you operate on, as I was preparing for this and writing out just a few descriptor words to kind of like really open up my brain to get thinking like, how would I describe Carl, was this mindset that you have adapted and molded and changed and morphed over the years that seems to increasingly approach just, I would say like the best word to describe it is joy. Like you and the way that you interact with people gives off a lot of that joy, that inner child, I think that most of us lose. I take a lot of pride and happiness in seeing like you exemplify that because I'm a pretty big cut up myself. So yeah, so for those who don't know, Carl is related to me now, but I'm so happy to have you on and thank you for making the time.
Thanks. Growing up is overrated.
It is overrated. So I guess the first question I do want to ask you, you are, first of all, how old are you?
As of yesterday, 67.
Oh my goodness, happy birthday. I can't believe I didn't call you or anything. You send stuff on my birthday.
I was sitting around all day waiting for your call. Went to bed really sad.
Yeah, I would too. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Well, happy late birthday. 67. That's a great age, man.
I'm gonna find out. I'm kind of excited.
Yeah. So for me, like I just turned 32. I think the next big turning point for me is 40. For you, do you have any more of this, like, as you look forward and you look back, do you have any more of those, I guess, next blocks of seasons of life that you kind of see yourself passing into?
Well, this last summer, I did declare myself semi-retired.
Okay.
I think I did that so that I would just kind of just check out this mindset of what does retired be? And I mean, I didn't have a lot of appointments, which I don't often in the summer. Typically every summer I take teachers to Rwanda. I didn't do that this summer. I went to Rwanda earlier in May this year, but, and I'm just back home after about 3 weeks on the road in schools from Vancouver, Canada to Phoenix to Long Island to Seattle to Denver. And so, it might not look like semi-retired, but in my head, I'm just giving myself permission to really do what is at hand, what is, to me, rewarding and useful and necessary. But without kind of thinking about, a full work week type of a thing, or better make up time when I miss time here or that. Just kind of flowing a little easier, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Good answer. So the question I usually ask people when I have them on the first time is this question. So I would ask you, who is Carl? And I think that really is going to dive into kind of what you shared to me a little bit ago, that you wrote an essay. So I'm going to ask that question, and I feel like it'll probably come out. But to you and all you've done, everywhere you've been, who is Carl?
Well, first off, you often think about roots. And I was a kid who was just really, really surrounded by love.
Mm.
Two older brothers who sometimes beat the love into me. But it was nonetheless love there. My parents, and been really fortunate in high school to fall in love with this gorgeous woman who's put up with me for 43 years now.
Mhm.
She was a junior and I was a senior. And so, yeah, I'm a son and a brother and a husband, and then three kids, and two of them married now, and two grandkids. So probably my favorite identity right now is Bapa, which is what my grandsons call me.
Mm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. That's one thing to me so I've been married now to Ashley for 7.5 years, and we dated for, I don't know, 2 and some change if you're including the engagement. So I've gotten to experience your family. And when we were dating and we broke up there for all of 10 days, 7 days not talking, I really lamented and mourned the fact that I would be losing her. But I also really mourned the fact that I felt like I was losing your guys' family, because there's something about that you guys have created, just through the forebears, that is super special. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I think it's something that not many people have the ability to experience.
Well, thanks for those kind words. As I think back about it, and kids, for example, we'll talk probably a little more about Rwanda later, but students are often asking me, why did you stay in Rwanda, in the middle of a genocide, not your country, not your language, those types of things. And my mind often always goes back to my mom and dad. It goes back to a house full of people much of the time, whether it was the weekend and we lived in the country and people would just kind of drive out and drop in. Back in the day, you didn't call ahead, you just dropped in, and or whether it was a couple of twins who lost their parents at 16 and came to live in our house. So I really found grew up with that idea that your home is central, home is safe, home is open. Home is a refuge in so many ways. And so I don't know how to express gratitude to my folks for doing that. And it's interesting because, as you look at your grandparents too, you see an interesting combination as you become an adult of who your parents are. I think about my mom's parents and my dad's parents, and just different strengths that they had, and also different challenges. And man, you just always want better for your kids. And my parents really exemplified that to me in a lot of ways. And you want, not like your kids to follow in your shoes or something kind of corny like that, but the idea that they can be free to, really explore, and there's no limits. And so we have our three kids all have a lot of fun with all three of them. But I was doing projects with Lisa, our daughter, recently when I'm down at her house, and there's nothing that girl. In fact, I look at all three of them, Sean or Mindy. There's nothing they won't take on, and I love that can-do spirit. And I think that was a real gift, and man, privilege that you're right. A lot of people don't have.
So one thing I really took away from the family, or continue to draw on and am inspired by, is like you, obviously my father-in-law, Daryl, when Pop when he was around, that, for most people know my story to the level like knowing that I lost my dad when I was 16. So like there's this, as I've gotten older, even to this day, like I really am drawn in to the male figurehead, like leaders, people who I would deem are good and respectable. So that was such a huge thing for me to be able to connect with each and every one of you guys individually, to draw on, what you're talking about, building a home that is safe. And then, I think each one of you hold these different levels of, you have your own seasoning of love. I think each one knows how to love in their best ability, and the way that, like, you're expressing, with your kids, like, there's no limits. I think you means, like, there's no limits to what they can do, right or wrong, that you will still love them with the same intensity, and to give them that, belief where they feel like empowered to go out and try things is something that I think a lot of people miss out on. So I really admire that. Like, that's not an easy thing to adopt, I don't feel like.
No, it's not. And a lot of times you get people telling you what you can't do all the time instead of, what you can do, and having somebody who will be there to support you, be kind of a safety net, is a huge, huge gift.
Yeah. So, like, you guys have always been, since I've been involved in the family, like a level of mentor to me. So, but for you growing up, obviously your father, maybe some aunts and uncles, and it doesn't even have to be family, but who were the people who really spoke to the formation of who Carl would become and the decisions that he would make?
Good question. Good question. It is, there is really nobody who comes close to my dad in that area in terms of influence, and watching him. I remember as I was in my teen years, seeing he was working for the church in finance, and seeing some stuff that just wasn't right going on in the church. And this was the Adventist church. And I remember saying to him, that's messed up. Why are you still involved, or stuff like that? And as a teenager, you're still kind of pretty binary, and you're thinking it's either this or that. You don't really have the nuances and stuff. But always remember, he said, I really think I can work for change better from within than from without. And you get kind of life lessons like that. He used to say, what you're not up on, you're down on. And so you recognize when you're down on something, maybe I need to learn more about this. Maybe I am down on it because I'm not up on what really is, going on there. And being able to go out on camping trips, and, just exploring. And we lived in the country, and, we had a little creek, and we'd go build dams in the creek and full tree houses. And so all those things, the environment that my parents provided was huge. And I would say, next kind of mentors after that, so to speak. I mean, there were wonderful aunts and uncles, and older cousins and stuff. But I really think about reading. I was very much, I loved, ever since I remember second grade is when I really started to burrow in deep and just go sit somewhere in a corner and have a book. And so that opportunity to travel through reading and enter into people's lives and journeys, really fascinated by things like the civil rights movement. I remember reading a book called Black Like Me. A white journalist went from the North down South, stained his skin darker, shaved his head, and tried to, and effectively did in many ways, pass as a person of color in the 60s. And what was it like that? And so really being able to kind of journey with somebody through the Holocaust, or the Underground Railroad. And always, too, I was surrounded by Bible stories. So whether it would be, David and Goliath, or it would be, Queen Esther for such a time as this. So all of these stories definitely, I think, reinforced the message that I got, too, from my folks, which was that you can do something. It's no matter what the situation is, we can do something right here at hand with what's, with where we find ourselves. It's fun to have kind of a beginning of a story, and 40 years later, a later story. And I think about different school teachers, and one in particular was a third grade teacher who, you can't always put your thumb on something when you are in third grade as to, this is a gift somebody gave me, because you're in third grade, and they're just basically telling you, that you're rambunctious and you're not sitting still or stuff like that. And yet, this lady, my third grade teacher, called me like 40 years later when a documentary came out about the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi. This came out on Frontline, called Ghost of Rwanda. And she saw me in that film and she contacted me. This is like, I don't know, 40 years or something after third grade. And she says, Carl, I wasn't surprised that you stayed. I mean, I'm shocked to hear Miss Wilder. I'm like, you can't, you can always you can't call your um, elementary school teachers anything but by the name you called them when you were a little kid. and I was shocked that she was calling me out of the blue. But then when she said, I wasn't surprised that you stayed, I'm like, no, I was a pain in the neck in third grade. I broke a urinal. It was an accident, but I'm thinking, if you're going to think about something, you wouldn't be thinking about, here's a kid who would stay in the middle of a genocide. But I found in that later encounter with her, and I've had more since then, we reconnected, is just a belief in you that, because I mean, she said I had this sense of justice or injustice, anger at injustice and stuff. I'm like, well, what kid doesn't? We all are like, that's not fair. That's not fair. And it's often very, self-focused, what's not fair, that we're really focused on. But somehow she saw beyond some of that. And I think that is a gift, to have people in your life who can see beyond the breaking the urinal stories and stuff and really see potential that's there. And I loved, she just continued right on in that conversation from not only affirming what she believed about me, but I want to meet your wife, she says, and once again, she's like, she has got to be an incredible woman. And so to be able to have people like Ron Wilder, who I can look back, and I didn't even know it at the time, but they were building and instilling into me, this idea of compassion and empathy, and you can make a difference, and seeing, potential that we don't see in ourselves. That's I'm sure there's a bunch more people like that, and I'm still unaware of what they gave
good.
me.
I think you really hit on something that I've thought a lot about in the past few years, and like, so we all have the ability to speak, and we often say like words cut and words can build up, but at a very fundamental, probably even scientific level, the words that we say like can affect the brain chemistry and how we arrive to a place of decision. And so like similarly, when I was really young, this is less serious of an example, but we were sitting in class. This is the same year of 9/11. I remember the classroom, and I remember we were all doing this sitting Indian style, as we called it, hitting our hands on our lap and in our hands. And we were like doing a beat to something, and we were saying some poem or something. I don't even remember. But I took the liberty to make everything that I could touch a piece of my drum set. And, everybody's kind of doing this. And I'm like, I'm making it up and going. And she stopped everybody, and she looked at me and she's like, Seth, you're going to be a drummer when you grow up. And so what I don't think she knew is my father was a very successful drummer, and like by any stretch of the imagination, especially as a kid, watching him do what he could do, it would make me feel so good. But it was those kind of small things that have lived in my mind for eternity. And like, we have such an ability to
it's crazy
believe.
just a small comment like that, and it's with you for life.
Another interesting, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because you talked a little bit about kids being binary and black and white. And I think we all get to a point, at least I did in my life, when I was very vehement about the support of the black and white, and I knew what was right and I knew what was wrong, and I was going to be very vocal about it. But then like, we come from, a religious background where Jesus says like, suffer the little children to come unto me. And there's other examples where he says like, if you would be like this child in the way that they think. And I think that has to do with like kind of the all-in mentality. But as I've gotten older, it is harder to be black and white on sometimes even the most fundamental things, because we have experienced nuance. So like, have you figured it out, how to how to discern when something should be black or white or not.
That's good. That's good, Seth. Um, there's a guy I listen to, on YouTube or some podcast, and actually I haven't read a lot of his work. I've done more listening. His name's Richard Rohr, Franciscan monk, and he talks about something to the effect of an addiction to certainty. Or I remember the first time I heard him talk about it, I think he said, we think we have a right to certainty. That in years gone by, people didn't have even encyclopedias available to them, in terms of knowledge and certainty about different things in life. And he started me on this journey of really stopping and asking myself. Sometimes I'm just kind of curious, and you got to Google that, just because you're curious. And I've even tried to dial back on some of that lately. Or I was going out on a little trip with my brother not so long ago, and I just stopped asking, where we were going or how far or anything like that, because I wanted to live in the moment. And I think there's so many things that pull us out of the moment, and wanting certainty is one thing, I'm sure, but also I feel like certainty often is blinders. It limits, it gives us kind of a tunnel vision. Anyway, this idea of certainty, I think really can narrow our vision. And so you start thinking, well, wait a minute, you really should know what's right or wrong. And just lost a really dear friend a couple of weeks ago. He's
sorry.
my age, down to the month and the year, and cancer. And when I was visiting him on some of the last visits, I remember one time I showed up and he says, Carl, there really are no rules. And this guy just loved to explore all different things and stuff. And I just cracked up when he said there's no rules. I said, come on, how about one, at least one rule, love. Let's just have that one rule and say there's only one rule, which is love. And he's like, okay, I can give you that. But that whole idea that I think basically we want security, we want safety, which is natural and which is good. It's valuable. But I think that we then think that safety is going to come through certainty, for example, where I would say much more, especially the experiences that the genocide taught me, safety was much more about relationships than about certainty. And I think so many things, financial security as well as physical security and emotional security, it's all coming down to relationships. And one thing that's pretty at times beautiful and frustrating about relationships often is the lack of certainty. Now, I like my brothers, they've got my back, and I'm certain about that. And there is no question there, but that they would see that I could predict, in certain things I could predict, other things I couldn't predict. They would surprise me with those things. And being willing to embrace the surprises, actually encouraging that, and living a life that is not all bound up in, certainty. And I've got to know. Now, some of us have personalities too that are much more, risk averse or prone to taking risk. And so even that is great, because we would often like to bring a certain level of uniformity. I think you could probably throw uniformity right in together with the conversation. They're not at all the same, but you'd find a lot of parallels between uniformity and certainty. And that, we would push back on uniformity or push back on the drive for certainty is really important to me. But what I liked about your question too was, I think a lot of times we're like, okay, we need to, well, here, let me give you this framework. Just learned this one a couple of months ago. Brian McLaren, that's what I want to say his name is. Anyway, he talks about rings of growth, like a tree, ring of growth on a tree. He doesn't like the word stages or phases, but he likes the word, the concept or the
Like a tree.
metaphor of a ring. And so the first ring is a ring of certainty, which is, a little kid. What's good, what's bad. Every time I throw something off my high chair, it goes down, it doesn't go up. So, I'm certain about different things. And then oh, that's bad. Oh, that's good. And, but then as we grow, the second ring is more complexity. And we recognize, oh, so it's not always that. Actually, the first one, I've been saying certainty to you. His first ring isn't certainty, it's simplicity. I knew it didn't sound right as I was saying it, but we're in the certainty mindset.
Yeah.
The first ring is simplicity. It's just simple. It's this or that. The second ring of growth is complexity. And you find out that, oh, mom and dad were joking when they said that, it's not just that simple, or there is, other things in life that where the rules are different here than they are there. And so you're like, oh, that's a little bit interesting, the complexity. His third ring is perplexity. And you might face things in life like a genocide, or you face things in life like you find out, for example, and sometimes the difference between complexity and perplexity might be, overlapping, but you find out that somebody remembers something different than you remembered it. Doesn't mean they're lying. It's just that memory is a malleable thing. So you start to realize, so memory isn't always a moral issue. If they tell it differently, it doesn't mean that they are,
perspective.
immoral and lying. Yeah. And his fourth ring, which I really love, is harmony. Now, I didn't see that one coming. Simplicity, complexity, perplexity, harmony. Whoa, where is that coming from? Why would harmony be that ring? But I think as we move and we grow and we move back and forth, it's not always, oh, now my life is all about complexity. Oh, it's all about perplexity. No, sometimes there are things that are simple, and I'm not letting go of that original question. When do we decide this is it? This is certain about that. And so, but what I love about that fourth ring of harmony is that as I move, from simplicity to complexity to perplexity, it's going to be a battle the whole way unless I begin to embrace curiosity. In case I let go, if I don't let go of judgment. So as I move in these larger outer circles, I start through curiosity to begin to learn even more and to embrace different perspectives, different cultures, all the differences, the beauties of differences. So you can see now, as somebody's moving away from judgment towards curiosity, embracing all the beauties of the diversity, that they're like, yeah, harmony is a natural, next one. It's like people who only stay in simplicity their whole life will always just sing the melody. There won't be any harmony. But people who do engage and embrace, I should say, and not fight against complexity and perplexity. And I think one of the ways for that is to recognize that I don't always have a right to certainty. But when you get to, and I think about, the example, of course, that comes to me in terms of when are you sure, when are you certain, is when my wife and I made the decision 30 years ago now in 1994 that I would stay in the middle of this genocide in trying to help two people who were in our house whose ID cards marked them to be exterminated. Not their character, not anything they had done. It was simply their ID cards. And when my wife and I, the thought came to us, man, they are so kind and respectful to foreigners here in Rwanda. They were that way in Zambia when we lived. They were that way in Zimbabwe when we lived there. In other countries we lived in, we were like, maybe we can leverage that privilege to help these two people. So when the embassy said, you have no choice, you have to leave, I came back pretty binary and said, no, I do have a choice. I'm a private American citizen and I can choose to stay. And then, they said, well, we need you to sign on a paper you refuse to help with the American government to leave. And the story goes on there. So I would say, to come to your question, when do we, when is it much more simple? I mean, it's crazy because that decision was far from simple but it was very clear.
Mm-hmm.
It was far from easy, but we also couldn't see another way, another choice. You can't abandon these people to be killed. And especially where we were coming from a background of
Disaster.
believing in God, believing in the power of love, believing that, there's no greater love than standing up for somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's about to be killed and wanting to live a life of love. Then, then it kind of, a lot of stuff just kind of, what do you say, boils
Aligned.
away.
Yeah.
A clarity comes. And even though I say it like this and a clarity comes, there's a lot of things when people actually know that story better and dig into it deeper. A lot of things people knew during that time that my wife and I didn't know. But, like UN
Yeah,
soldiers
like
were
what?
leaving and the
Mm-hmm.
genocide will last for more than 3 months and more than 1 million people would be killed. A lot of stuff we didn't know when we made that decision, but we were certain that it was the right thing. So I think part of certainty might be definitely connected to the good of somebody outside of yourself,
Mm.
you know? Um, and if I'm just thinking about my own good, then certainty, I don't know, I'm just winging this stuff, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking if I'm just thinking of my own good, maybe certainty is something that's a little more, I would want to be more cautious about.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it makes sense. I have this like building of an idea, or it's really a hypothesis, and I don't claim to fully believe this, but I have like in this framework that we're talking about uncertainty and understanding. So I spent a lot of my earlier years from 16 to now searching for a reason, because if I have a reason, then I'm
Mm,
certain that what
mm,
happened and what
uh-huh,
transpired can bring
uh-huh.
peace. And what I've come to understand is that peace, there you can achieve peace with lack of understanding at times, in acceptance, because I'll bring this full circle now, kind of with the hypothesis from my worldview, and I would share your worldview, the Christian worldview. We believe in the plane of existence that we currently operate in is the one that we see each other in, and God, other than Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, is like this behind the veil world that we can't see, the principalities and powers that the Bible talks about, right? And so I have this hypothesis that post sin, that veil was erected. And in some ways, a veil was released, but this veil was erected because with our situation that we find ourselves in, with a marred world of sin in our operation, and what you're saying, that kind of distortion and broken chain of love, there are things that if we saw them, if we had our eyes completely open to everything that's going on, I don't think that our brains, maybe a few, because a few have been, quote unquote translated, but all of the just intensity and evil, I think, that's going on, and the things that don't make sense, it would overwhelm us to the point where we could not even function. And so because I've done a lot of thinking and chewing on these re-emergence of ideas and experiences that people are having around psychedelics. So I'm going to bring this all full circle, but we have people who are taking these different compounds who have different effects on the brain, and they're describing very similar experiences. And so the way that I have tried to seek understanding in that is like, well, when I read the Bible and I read the story, like such as the one with um, King Saul and the Witch of Endor, he goes to see a witch and he goes to talk to the prophet Samuel. We know from the story, in the context of the story, he's not actually talking to Samuel. He's talking to like a figment of it. And so like I've been trying to like pull all these things together and figure out why, as humans, we have this insatiable desire for like something else. Because if I go back to the very original beginning story with Adam and Eve, like Eve was told that she could have this experience that no one else had, and this knowledge that nobody else had at the time. And if she just did this, then she'd have it. And then Saul was doing the same thing, and now people are kind of going back to that. And I'm not proclaiming to believe 100% that psychedelics are bad, but the understanding I've arrived to is that kind of what you're saying, what is the certainty that I'm searching for? Is it self-centered or is it others-centered? So Saul, he was stepping out seemingly to go and find a peace that he was going to be able to make it through whatever was about to happen. And he sought that from outside means and something that wasn't, deemed, at least in the Bible, like good. And so I see a lot of my friends and people who I would consider like truly good friends who have walked this path, had these experiences, and some of them have been arguably very good, but their motivation usually is like a self-serving thing. And you can then define what is self-serving. So again, there's so much nuance involved. But the whole hypothesis that I'm kind of trying to draw here and see what you think is, do you think that the reason we have our like eyes aren't open to that world, the metaphysical world, it's called quantum mechanics, is because if it was revealed, it would just like it would break us down? I know that's kind of a far stretch, but I was kind of what do you think? I don't know if I explained all of that well, but what you were saying like really started to like turn that.
Yeah. There's a lot of different directions we could go here, Seth. Let's try this one for a moment. The religious world, from my perspective, is really fraught with a ton of us and them thinking. And us and them thinking is often really permeated with a sense of certainty. This is right and this is wrong. So when somebody, for example, would ask me if I'm a Christian, I would want to talk with them to clarify a few things, because for some people, a Christian is very, very, yes or no, very binary, very dualistic mindset. It's like, okay, this is right, this is wrong. There's the Catholics and there's the Protestants, and they were showing who was wrong there and who was wrong here. So you have a lot of these conversations of right and wrong. And I'm like, that I don't identify with that anymore. I used to, but I don't. I think that, what I experienced in the genocide, where you had a country with more than 80% of the people going to church every weekend, and that whole religious infrastructure was not a barrier to genocide, but could actually be hijacked and used in the carrying out of genocide is deeply, deeply troubling to me. And so, I'm much more comfortable when starting a conversation with people and they kind of like, well, sort of your philosophy, or, when they say you have a Christian way of looking at things or stuff like that, I'm much more comfortable talking specifically about teachings of Jesus, for example. And so, let me give one other kind of big piece here for me, and the way I'm looking at spiritual vision, or seeing things that, not being able to see things, believing in things that you can't see, those kind of things. We'll come back again to the framework in Rwanda and this horrible event.
Yes.
Students often, and adults, everyone often asks, do you believe in God after a genocide? How in the world, what's implied there is that we've got an all-powerful, all-loving God who just stood by and let, grandmas be raped and babies be butchered and slaughtered. And it's like, how in the world can you fit those things together? And my initial response to that is, let's set the word God aside for a minute, because that word means so many different things to different people. And some people, it's a great comfort and joy, and to other people, it's obscene. And so let's talk about love. And even love, of course, is going to have different, mean different things to different people. But I don't think it's quite as
convoluted,
charged.
Yeah.
As what's that?
Convoluted, charged. Yeah. Like,
yeah. I don't think it's quite as a trigger for people as the word God can be. So I'd ask them, where did you see love in the genocide? And we have a 40-minute film that we send to schools before I go and speak there. And so I'll say, where in this 40-minute film you watch? Leave me and my wife out. We're not trying to get people to pat us on the back or anything. Leave us out for this point. and just tell me, where did you see love in that film? And they start giving examples of neighbor ladies who, the first night of the genocide, stood up for our family, and a man who allowed 40 people in his home at great risk to his wife and children, and when they came to kill people in his home, he offered these neighbors who slash would be considered killers, enemy. He offered them chickens to take home to feed their kids that night. You talk about a nurse in an orphanage and the incredible selfless service she was giving to kids. At the same time, she was disinfecting and bandaging the wounds of the people committing genocide. So you see love when you look all around. But what I like about that framework is that instead of saying, where's God, where we kind of look, I don't know, we're looking up around somewhere, where's God, as if God is somewhere, that we can't see or experience. When we say, where's love, our focus comes right down to you, me, very much our hands, our choices. So for me, God is my framework for love. Other people may have a different framework for love. So I don't need to argue with anybody about their framework for love when we can have some good conversation talking about love. So this framework of Christianity, I think, has some beautiful parts in many people's minds. And for other people, it was Christians who killed, my brother, who was a doctor, who was helping people with, assessed with dignity of life and assistance of death, at the end of a very long suffering period. And these people called Christians killed him, or you have all of these extreme cases. And once again, our brain loves extreme cases because, again, it loves either this or that. So, when we're in the middle of in the middle of the road, so to speak, the brain's like, come on, I don't have time for this. I got a lot of work to do. I got a lot of information to bring in and organize. You got to tell me, is it this or that? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? And we have the ability with, our prefrontal cortex to push back and say, whoa, brain, hold on here. It's a little more nuanced than those things. So kind of we went off on those different ideas, but coming back to what you are asking, kind of behind the veil, so to speak. I don't know, Seth. I haven't found it super helpful or necessary in my journey right now to dig deeper into that, the world of quantum physics or what is behind the veil and stuff. Maybe one day I will. Right now, is something like PTSD is a lot more relevant to what's on my desk, what's on my table, what top shelf for me. How people can actually see the enemy in their neighbor, that becomes a really important conversation for me. Can people really change? What's the role of neuroplasticity in rewiring our brain? Those are stuff that's a lot more where I'm spending a lot more time these days, because I think those things all you can, as you think about them, you can draw very direct lines back to love and the role of love, both in the loss or apparent failure of love, or in the incredible healing and reconciliation that comes about by love. So I don't know, did I take us too far away, or
No, I think that was really good. I think one of my one of the things that makes it difficult but also fun, I think some people do find it fun in having deep conversations, is so my brain tends to kind of, when I throw an idea on the ground, it like splatters and it has these directions. It goes about 7 ways, and I'm trying so hard to like tie it all together. So I think you did a great job of like touching on the high points, and similar to you, I think, except I'm just a little bit more. I don't think I have the wisdom and experience to articulate and keep that vein, but you did a really good job of like touching on those points, and so I really appreciated that. Yeah.
Thanks. I do, just to kind of summarize, though, this idea of certainty, learning to live free of certainty, even free of longing, which was another challenge. I was just writing in my journal back in January. What's it like to live a life free of longing? So, and often longing is connected to certainty. We're longing for peace, or we're longing for this or that, and those things. But learning to live a life freer, I can't say completely free because I don't know who's completely free, but
Sure.
learning to recognize the grip that certainty can have on us, that longing can have on us, and actually live in the moment, present moment, and live with a sense of peace. I remember once, counselor, because I've experienced some incredible counselors over the years after the genocide. And I remember this one guy who said, um, have you ever thought about this, Carl? Have you ever thought about letting something be what it already is in your life?
Hmm.
And I'm like, that sounds like apathy or something. What do you mean I'm going to let it be what it already is in my life? That's why I'm here talking to you. So it doesn't have to
To
be
be
what it
that way.
already is
Yeah.
in my life. But I realized as time went on, I had to add a little caveat to that thing. I had to add, because I said, okay, I'm going to try to wrestle with this and see if there's something really here, because I respect the guy a lot. And it does sound, kind of, initially it sounds like I said apathy, but then when you think a little deeper, it does seem kind of inviting. And so I added this little caveat: let it be what it already is in your life, but won't always be. I
Hmm.
had to just add that last little piece on the end, but won't always be. Now I don't need to add that last little piece on the end. And one of the things that has taught me, one of the benefits of that idea, let it be what it already is in your life, is that, say it's a relationship that you're struggling with. Say it's something at work that you're struggling with, whatever it is that you're struggling with. By struggling with it, we kind of stay more in what I would call these days our downstairs brain, our amygdala, our kind of survival, reptilian, fight, flight, freeze
Mm-hmm.
type of a mode there. So the creativity in the upstairs brain, the prefrontal cortex, the creativity, the empathy, all of those things are kind of offline when I'm fighting, when I'm resisting.
Mm.
But when I start to say, okay, I'm going to let this be what it already is, because it is, and and that would have a certain level of acceptance. But I also had to throw in there won't always be, because I needed that hope, there.
Yeah. The hope.
But now I'm learning to even live without throwing won't always be. Maybe it will always be.
Hmm.
But when I'm in this sense of more of a calm, centered contentment, even in the midst of something that just does not seem right. And I'm not saying to turn our back on injustices or to be apathetic at all. But what I'm saying is, if I can be in a more accepting mindset, and no, I'm not accepting the rape of grandmas and the killing of babies. No, I'm not. But I'm understanding this is what it is right now. Doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. But in that mindset, I am so much better equipped to address the injustices, to actually bring about change in the
Hmm.
end, than when I'm in a constant fight
Fight or
fight
flight mode.
type of a mindset against that. Now, what brought us off on that idea?
I
You
think we were talking
said,
about certainty still, and yeah, kind
yeah,
of wrapping up the idea of what it is.
maybe. I feel like there was another connecting link to all of that idea of certainty and yeah, longing. Yeah, just a sense of peace. And I can still begin to see some of those connections between, let it be what it already is in your life. And because fighting has often doesn't change it,
Mm-hmm.
and but I guess, and even the word fighting connotates a certain level of violence, and that would lend maybe to another
There's
conversation
a
about
struggle.
violence and nonviolent thinking. But
Mm.
yeah, back to you, sir.
No, yeah, there's so many good thoughts there. I mean, I was just kind of reflecting and trying to apply some of these situations to memories I have, even from the recent and distant past, to see how it fits. And I think, yeah, in the context of, or on the topic of PTSD, whether it was me being held at gunpoint or the day we walked up on our house and found my father dead in our house, there's a lot of, as these memories come
Mm.
back, and the body remembers times and dates even when we're not straight up conscious about it. The subconscious pulls it out. A lot of the desire for certainty in those moments really, I think, can also be described as the relentless pursuit of control, especially me in my own life, because I would start to feel a certain way. The body would remember what happened, and I couldn't have the emotional intelligence at that point to like kind of, write it down like, oh, I think I'm feeling because of this way because of those things. Once I came to a place kind of what you're talking about, where I was able to accept what I'm feeling and be okay with it, and accept that it may not go away.
Yeah.
Even knowing habitually and through cycles that like typically things do have an ebb and flow, and you have good times, bad times, but the acceptance that this may not go away it was a freeing thing for me. And I don't struggle from the level of depression that I have known people to struggle, such as my father. But I was in a place where, like, I recently had a conversation with a guy who was really depressed, and I didn't know anyone else experienced this particular feeling of like you wake up in the morning, you feel good for 5 to 10 minutes, but all of a sudden you just feel like this descent of darkness where you just like are compressed, depressed inside it. And I only felt that for a short time, a few months, to the point where like I did consider taking my life, and was like, well, what would that look like? And, it's a dark place to be, but then coming through that, starting to deal with the feelings on a level of, talking and really accepting outside influences of light and love to kind of inform what I was experiencing, helped me put me on a trajectory to where like I could accept. I think of a beautiful example of it is in this book, A Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, one of the few books I've ever read. Have you read that book?
Yeah,
Yeah.
several times.
So she tells that story where they're in this concentration camp, her and her sister. Her sister's sick on her deathbed, and I forget what the exact quote is, but she finds joy in the acceptance that basically what you're saying, as she's on her deathbed, and Corey's talking to her sister. I forget her name, but Corey herself is angry, frustrated, mad at the injustice, is using that deeper kind of reptilian side of the brain. Her sister is operating in the frontal lobe in that moment.
Yeah.
And then she makes that connection, and just the peace that you can have in any situation when you come to that it's inspiring, which I'm sure you've experienced on a number of levels at Rwanda.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if that story was the one where her sister was telling, and I can't remember the sister's name right now either
I can
for
Google
some
it.
reason, but her sister was telling her to give thanks for the fleas. I feel
yes,
was the thing
in the bed.
And she's like, get out of here. That is going too far. But later on, they realized it was the fleas that were keeping the guards out of there, so they could have some quiet time together. They could have some peace time to strengthen and be there for one another. And it was the fleas who were keeping the guards from harassing them in that location.
Yeah.
And that idea of, we talk about finding a silver lining or making, lemon juice out of lemons, lemonade. But I think that there is this place where we can come where we're not saying that justifies anything, that the horrors that happened have justified it, but the fact that we can grow in these situations, we can grow more kind and compassionate in these horrific situations, is an incredible testimony to the power of love. No matter what your framework for love is that testimony to the power of love. When I was with some students from Chicago who were studying peace 5 years ago, 2019, in Rwanda, and they were talking with survivors there, and they were asking these ladies, about God. And the ladies said to these young people from Chicago they said, early we thought that God forgot us, and then things got worse and we thought God didn't like us, and things got even worse and we decided we didn't like God. And she kind of ended with that. And then the student, to his credit, he said, but what about today? And the lady kind of smiles and she says, we got really lonely and we decided to try God again.
Yeah.
And then they made this statement that really will always stick with me. They said, it's our pain that drives us deeper into love. And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute here, because so many times it seems like, you're either going to experience pain or you're going to experience joy, and we throw right in there love. But what do you mean your pain drives you deeper into love. And as I kind of journaled on that a bit after the visit, I realized when you are drowning in pain, you don't know if you're going to get another breath, you know, and you reach up and you find this life raft or this life preserver called love. You realize that is the one thing that can help you pull your head above water and take another gulp of air,
Mm,
and that love in service to people who the world says don't deserve it can be some of the most powerful experiences with love. And I think that's where these stories of people who have survived the horrors and they have been able to journey to a place of getting free from their anger and bitterness, and even after determining if it's safe or not, moving into reconciliation. That kind of a story and an experience just really does, to me, blow me away and testify to how, yep, our pain really was able to drive us deeper into love. And I don't blame anybody whose pain drives them deeper into despair and cynicism. I don't blame them at all. And I'm not
mm,
like, oh, that's your fault, or well, you have a choice and things like that, because I know that so many people like that, they don't see any choice. And it's sure not up to me to say that there is a choice. But when I do see somebody like these ladies and they're saying our pain drives us deeper into love, I'm like, you mean that's possible? That's a real thing? And so that inspiration, and then you want to start asking, okay, so what are the tools? How did it drive you deeper into love? And you find that they have shared experiences with people who they had great differences with, or great anger and bitterness, but when they work side by side, building homes together or roads together, or they had some form of a shared experience, they began to rewire their brain. They began to see the person differently.
mm.
And that is, to me, some of the incredible, tremendous power of love. It can be a very practical, not just an ethereal thing up in the sky, but a very practical decision. I don't want this guy to help me harvest my crops. He did terrible things to my family, but I'm pretty desperate right now. I need some help. And so you have a shared experience side by side, and you begin to rewire your brain, and you're like, whoa,
Mm.
didn't think this was possible.
Yeah. So I think that this is a really appropriate time, if you can, and I have no limit on what I'm asking in terms of time, so take as much liberty as you want. But I would love to hear, because we've talked around this whole topic of Rwanda, and there's a lot that goes into it. Your arrival there, talk to me a little bit about, I guess, the building of relationships and then kind of leading up to that day. If anybody wants to read this book, by the way, I'll just show it really quick. I'm Not Leaving. It's a great book by Carl Wilkins, where you can kind of find a lot of the pieces where he journaled and wrote through this story. But I would love to hear from you, like that lead up and then what happened.
Um, yeah, this could obviously take hours. Let's just kind of give a couple of snapshots and see where you might like to go
For
from
sure.
any of those snapshots. Um, my wife and I graduated from college in 1981. A week later, we got married. 6 weeks later, we moved to Zimbabwe. I was a school teacher there. She was working in the accounting department at the boarding high school. And our daughters were born in Zimbabwe. We were Zimbabwe and Zambia. After 6 years, came back to the States. So I was a shop teacher, auto mechanics, welding, that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. After 6 years in Africa, came back to the States and did an MBA. And so that combination of shop teacher MBA, we were looking for a job. We really enjoyed being in Africa. We loved, raising our kids in Africa to at least a certain age. We wanted them to have an international experience, kind of all over the world. And so we got a job again in Rwanda this time, which looked like a really peaceful little country. In 1990, we moved there working with the humanitarian arm of the Adventist Church, ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency. So we were building schools and operating clinics. We were working there for 4 years before the genocide. Now, because of time, we'll just briefly outline. 6 months after we got there in 1990, a war started. So a 3-year war is going to precede the 3 months of the genocide.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-year war is almost like a plow or something in many ways coming and preparing the soil. It's driving people to their downstairs brain on a daily basis. War does that. They're fearing for their lives. There's scarcity, there's enemies, there's threats all around. So when we are spending a lot of time in our downstairs brain, which might be just clicking on the internet, because most of the stuff on the internet is often, lion's share is about bad stuff that, frustrates or annoys or confuses. Anyway, when you are at war for 3 years, you can be very, very vulnerable to manipulation. And a relatively small group of politicians, some members of the business community, launched a coup when the president's plane was shot down. The 3-year war, we thought had come to an end. People had laid down their guns. We were going to have a new government, including everybody, but there was a small group of extremists who said, no, we will never share power. And this relatively small, I don't know, 30, 40, this relatively small group at the heart of men and women will launch a coup, and they will seek to exterminate the other. And I won't go into the difference between the majority and the minority groups, the Hutu and the Tutsis. What I will say, though, is that they married each other much more than they hated each other.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not an easy thing to pull off, to convince people that their neighbor is the enemy. But they've come through war. There's also more historical components to influences in society, in the people's thinking. And so when the president's plane is shot down on April 6, 1994, and on April 7, this gang launches their coup, the genocide begins. And, we have no idea, my wife and I, that this will last 3 months, that more than 1 million people will be killed. But what we do know is the young lady who lived and worked in our home had a Tutsi ID card. She was part of the minority. She was marked for extermination. We knew, as I said earlier, that they gave foreigners incredible privilege, which we didn't earn, but we thought maybe we could leverage that privilege. So when the embassy said, we're all leaving, nobody staying, not the ambassador, nobody, we're all leaving, but don't bring any Rwandans. We're like, whoa, wait a minute. Wait, how can we abandon these people in our house? There was the young lady plus the young man who came in the evening as a watchman. Both of them had the minority ID cards. And so my wife and I, thinking this won't be more than 2 weeks, thinking, we can do this. We can't just abandon and leave these people to be killed. We made the decision that I would stay. You said you were 32, Seth. I was 4 years old. I was 36 at the time. Our kids were 10, 7, and 5 at that time. My wife and I will make the decision that I will stay and she'll take the kids to safety, because it was like the American government was basically telling us we couldn't take our whole family out. Yeah, we could take our American family out, but our Rwandan, the young lady who lived and loved, I always tell everybody, if you want to try to get an idea, you think about somebody who's loved on your kids, and it's like their family. You can't abandon them.
Yeah.
And so, when we said goodbye, we thought maybe 2 weeks, but it will stretch on over 3 horribly long months. And I will work with my Rwandan colleagues, the guys who had been building schools together. Now we'll be working together to bring food and water to 3 groups of orphans around the city. I'll be building relationships with guys who are in charge of the genocide in the city, men who later will be hunted and captured and tried and are hopefully spending, I know I shouldn't hopefully, but the rest of their lives in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, some of them have already been released, but that's another story between punitive thinking and restorative thinking, and a healing priority as opposed to a justice priority, which really doesn't usually break the cycle of violence. But so that's a summary, Seth.
Yeah.
So where do you want to go?
Yeah, I've got lots of questions, but so I underlined a few pieces in the book, because when I remember reading this book years ago, really for the first time, I read it cover to cover in probably a day or two, which is pretty quick for me. Most people probably could do it in a couple hours, but I sat down and absorbed it. And this was a moment in my life when, we talked earlier about the binary, black and white, and I started to really accept the fact that there is a lot of nuance in life. And so for me growing up, um, the interaction that I've had as it pertains to war and genocide are all outside non-experiential influences such as movies, stories, true or false, fiction, nonfiction. That's what I had. And I had it in my mind, like, that it's pretty black and white. There's the good guys and the bad guys, and whatever side you subscribe to, that kind of paints the picture of the other, and then you move forward. But there's this story that I'd like to hear your perspective on, where you built this relationship with Colonel Renzaho, is that how you say his name? And
That's right.
that profoundly shifted my view. And I want to hear that story when you first met him, and then how he ended up playing a huge part in the saving of this minority group, even though he was leading the killers to do these things.
Yeah.
And it
In
really
the capital
has,
city.
yeah, it's still to this day is such a dissonant story in it, because it's like the World War II or World War I story when the both sides came out to play soccer on Christmas or something like that. But this is even more extreme in that, it shows the power of love and building a relationship. But it's so incredibly uncomfortable for me to accept that that's how it went down, because it's still like, I want it to make sense, but it makes no sense why, if you're doing something 10 minutes from now and then you're doing a completely opposite thing in the following hour, it just like is such a dissonant thing. And it really shifted my view on that part of the world. So if you could tell a little bit of that story.
Sure. This whole idea of good guy, bad guy really is just a myth. It's a construct that, we put together to kind of, I think, satisfy our brain. Our brain's like, okay, what am I going to do with this information? I got to put it somewhere. And no, you can't put it good and bad. There's one or the other. And so we give in to these myths, I think, at times when when we do it, we really, close ourselves off to deeper understanding and appreciation and opportunities. Understanding, appreciate, yeah, opportunities. And so I had a pastor, a Rwandan pastor, and his wife, who I invited to my home to live with me during the genocide, and they accepted that invitation. And they were of the majority, so they weren't openly being targeted. But of course, if you weren't supporting the genocide, you could be seen as a sympathizer or as the enemy. But I remember after the 3-week point, the pastor said, I said to him one morning, man, I'm so glad we're all alive. There were 5 of us there in the house, pastor and his wife, me, and the young man and young lady with the Tutsi ID cards who were, marked, targeted to be killed. And I said, I'm so glad we're all still alive. It's like these 3 weeks have been really hard, but there's got to be more. What else can we do? And he said, well, if you're going to do anything outside the house, you got to build a relationship with the people in power. And I don't know how to stress that enough, that the wisdom and the value of that counsel. There's no way I would get through the roadblocks. There's no way I would have been able to do anything. See, the genocide was really highly organized and very structured and written, working on orders, very, it's like once orders were given, you follow orders. And it was very much a society of obedience to authority. So connecting with these authorities was, the wise counsel this pastor gave me. And while the colonel who was in charge of the genocide in the capital city is going to become an incredible ally to me. I mean, he's going to tell me about orphanages that need help, knowing that there's children at those orphanages of the people he's trying to exterminate. He's trying to, eradicate. And so you once again, like, well, wait a minute, is he on whose side is he on? And one of the things that I think is really helpful in trying to counter the myth of good guy, bad guy is the idea that we all have this potential for good inside of us. And yet our brain is just like this taskmaster of, okay, it's either got to be this or it's got to be that. Come on, you can't be in between or anything. And yet we've all seen it. We've seen it in ourselves. We've seen it in other people. We do things that we are not proud of. We are in fact perhaps ashamed of, or we do things that we're grateful we were a part of, and that did involve risk or sacrifice. And so the things that we would label a person as good, or the things we'd label as bad, that we know they can be easily assigned to the same person. So what in the world does all of that mean? It means that if you believe the potential for good is there, you got a chance of accessing it. If I believe that, Seth, I'm in trouble and I need a cell phone, and I believe Seth has a cell phone, then I'm going to say, hey, Seth, can you help me? If I don't think you even have the potential for good, then I won't even approach you, or it would never cross my mind. So that was a big lesson for me during this time was, you see people as the enemy, but sometimes they might end up being your greatest ally. I can appreciate your frustration with this colonel, but it got even more crazy than the colonel. The guy, one of the guys who was in the neighborhood of the biggest orphanage we were working for, one of the guys who was running the extermination of that neighborhood, he had a killing squad. By the time it's over, he and his gang are responsible for killing more than 2,000 people. I don't know if you remember that story in the book, Seth, where the orphans were evacuated. I mean, we'd been surrounded. We were sure there was going to be a massacre. They got evacuated. I went back to collect their blankets and stuff, and here's this killing squad leader and his gang looting the orphanage. I'm like convinced for sure they're going to kill me and my coworker, Gasikwa Elise. And I have a letter of authorizing me to collect stuff from the orphanage from Colonel Renzaho. I pull the letter out of my pocket. I give it to the leader of the killing squad. The guy turns around and orders his guys to help me load the truck. The guys who are looting the orphanage, who I'm sure are about to kill me and Gasikwa, within a few minutes, we are all working together to haul orphan belongings over to the church where they had been moved. And I am just blown away by this. One of the things, though, because I'm trying to put some structure, like you, I'm trying to put some framework. I'm trying to figure out, is there a formula? What's really going on here? And as I was writing about it in the book, I remember trying to figure out, how can I communicate to people what this was like? And there's part of the story where they helped me find a truck, but the truck had 12-inch metal sides on it. And we needed some, because they would haul sand or gravel and drop those sides down and shovel it off, and stuff. So how am I going to build temporary big sides on the truck so we could really haul blankets and bulky things like that? And so we started bringing the tables from the cafeteria out and standing them on end in each side of the truck. So the tables started to build high sides on the truck. As I was carrying the table with the guy who had a machine gun over his shoulder, one of the killing squad guys, I realized that when we involve ourselves in acts of service, when we engage our mind and our muscles in acts of service, it changes the way we think about ourselves. It changes the way we think about others. So you can be sitting in a situation and think, that's impossible. Nobody here will help me or no. But you get your rear out there and you start doing something, and you start doing something for other people. And then you could start finding allies where you never thought you would find an ally. But the big challenge often is not being held prisoner by our brain that says, this is impossible. There's nothing you can do. Get your rear out there and start. And you really can find a way to get through some incredibly impossible situations. And in the end, you still may not have a ton of logic to explain it, but you've got some results that are also pretty equally unexplainable.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think that it really brings home the fact that what I'm realizing even from this conversation is that love isn't a logical thing. And I often get myself in trouble
There's a
in life.
love logic, but I hear you. There's stuff that makes sense and there's stuff that makes love. But I mean, there is a love logic because, if you get pulled over by a cop for driving too fast, and the cop shows you some grace. I mean, you might not call that love, but you might call it love. I am much more inclined to change my driving speed based on grace than on a big fine.
Mm.
Now, I know, you see, but here's the deal. I know a big fine is a deterrent and stuff, but my thinking when I get fined is, how can I not get fined next time? How can I get away? How can I not get caught? And my thinking when grace or kindness is extended to me is not, oh boy, I don't know how I can, not get caught here again. My thought is, it takes me into a whole nother perspective, a whole nother framework. And I'm not just thinking about me and my appointments and I got to get there faster, but I'm thinking about others. And so, yeah, I hear you. Love's not logical by transactional ways of thinking, but boy, love is logical when you talk about, can people change? Transformative experiences. Love, I would say, is one of the most powerful. And yeah, maybe logic isn't the right word, but love is the most powerful formula I would put forth.
So I want to read something to you, and you'll recognize it. It's something you sent me earlier, but I'm just going to quote the end of it, and then we're going to talk about, I'd love to talk about this essay that you wrote that ties in really well with this, and there's further follow-up questions, but I want to read it first. So it says, a few years ago, this is you writing, a few years ago, I met an incredibly strong and courageous and resilient woman who survived the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. She shared with me her journey of years of healing and eventual reconciliation with the man who was part of the gang who had killed her husband and 2 sons. After hearing this seemingly unbelievable story, she could see that I was struggling to see the man who had helped kill her husband and sons as anything other than a brutal murderer. She told me many positive stories about this man's actions towards her and some of the challenges he had faced along the way. And then these were the words that she said to me, quote, "It's wonderful to be a part of making someone beautiful again, and this man is beautiful." So, yeah, you've now been somewhat 30 years removed from this. I'm sure that you've come to terms with some levels of forgiveness and others that are still challenging just based on what you have said. What is something that you're working through now that you're trying to find peace about? Because you wrote this essay, you can talk about that, but what is it that you're actively, this has taken the mental bandwidth?
Well, for a long time, forgiveness is a subject that often comes up after something horrific. I mean, it can come up after small things, but horrific stuff. And we have these discussions. Is that forgivable? Are some things unforgivable and those types of things? And I have, in many ways, stopped using the word forgiveness. And I try to simply use the word or the sentences, get free from anger and bitterness. Because I think when we say forgive, sometimes we think, oh, it's okay. Well, forgive doesn't mean it's okay. Or we say forgive you, it's like, oh yeah, the person was really sorry. Well, no, whether they're sorry or not is not. And this is just my choice. You could choose a bunch of different definitions for forgiveness, but I choose this definition of getting free from anger and bitterness. If they're sorry or not, well, it makes it easier if they're sorry, but whether they're sorry or not, I still want to get free from anger and bitterness. This anger and bitterness has the potential to kill me, to destroy my relationships, to destroy my kids' relationships, the grandkids. It can go on for generations. So the idea of getting free from anger and bitterness, I think, is like a universal invitation. Anger has a great role in standing up for boundaries, for reestablishing boundaries. But lately, I've also come to just believe that anger has a shelf life. Anger can be really valuable up to a point, but then it can become poison. And so, and that's going to be different for different people. And sometimes we don't even know, man, the leader of that killing squad who, was going to kill everybody at the orphanage, and then he ordered his guys to help me load the truck. I stumbled on him 21 years later in a prison in Rwanda, completely by accident. And I was physically sick. I felt like vomiting when I realized who that guy was. I didn't know I had so much anger inside of me, and it came out that day towards him. And I think it was my anger towards the failure of the UN mission in Rwanda, towards the American government's contribution to withdrawing the UN soldiers. There's all kind failure, anger towards organized religions, failure. So sometimes we don't even know how much anger we've got inside us.
Mm.
But if we can start the conversation recognizing that there is probably some anger and bitterness and getting free, yeah, that's really not about the person who, because often we think forgiveness is about the person who did the harm. I think there is a gift to the person who does the harm when we get free of anger and bitterness, but that's a ripple effect. The main stone in the water, the main benefit of this, not the ripples, but the main benefit of this is for us who were wronged to get free from anger and bitterness. Then, if it's safe, we could, like this lady in the story, we could pursue reconciliation. Then the question is, are they sorry? Very relevant question. Do they deserve it? That might be a little harder to navigate around, but do I want a world where people can heal? Yes. Do I want a world where we can break the cycle of violence? Yes. And so reconciliation then may become a goal in a certain situation. In different situations. I'm not saying you reconcile with people who abused you as a kid or something, and then they just go on to abuse you, or you continue to be a doormat or things like that.
Sure.
We need to know that it's safe and healthy to reconcile, and we need to look and understand codependency and things like that. But your idea of this story of Maria and Filbert and her ability to rewire her brain so that when she saw this man, she no longer saw him primarily as the guy who killed her husband and sons, but she began to see him as more than the worst thing he had done. She began to see him as a human. She actually, by the time we met, 25 years after the genocide, she introduced him as this valuable family friend, helped her with planting, helped her with harvesting. She says he does things for me like my sons would have done if they were alive. And I'll tell you, honestly, Seth, when she said that one, she says he helps me planting and harvesting. And in my mind, I'm not saying it out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, that's the least he can do, you know, and he does things for me like my sons. And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, well, if he wouldn't have killed them, they would be here to do it for you. I realized, I don't know if it was while I was still listening to the story or later, but I realized every time she said something positive about this guy,
you had a negative.
I was stuck in 1994. All I could see was a murderer. So every time she said something positive, in my mind, I was countering it with this, yeah, well, if he wouldn't have killed your sons, type of thing. He apologized to me again and again. That was a little harder for me to counter, but I found a way. I was like, okay, apologize once, that's fine. Now get out. Don't keep coming back with your apologies. You see what I'm just really stuck in 1994. I cannot see this man as anything other than that. And I realized later when I was journaling, I was like, what is your problem, Carl? You are with a woman who is just incredibly strong, resilient, gracious, beautiful, loving heart. And all you're doing is countering everything positive she's saying in your head. And I realized I had a subconscious belief that if you say something positive about somebody who's done something horrible or bad in any way, but in this case, extremely horrible, if you say something positive, you're diminishing the crime. There's a subconscious belief, so I don't think it's true. Well, it's got a certain logic, but hang on. You diminish their crime and you diminish their accountability. And then in my journaling, I'm like, okay, whoa. If that's what you think, what about Maria? If she says something positive about, that's the name of the lady, if she says something positive about the guy who killed her husband's son, do you think she's diminishing the crime or diminishing their accountability? No way. So I have got to recognize that this is a messed up subconscious belief that I hold, that if you say something positive, you are diminishing the crime or diminishing their accountability. Really, what Maria is doing is she's getting free from anger and bitterness. And her pathway of getting free from anger and bitterness is reframing this man, is seeing him as more than that. Now, she'll never forget he's the guy who killed her husband and sons. But instead of that fact, like my arm, the fact that he's the guy who killed my husband, instead of that fact triggering more anger or confusion or loneliness or bitterness, she actually would say it now with a sense of wonder. I cannot believe this is the same guy, because she has formed so many new neural pathways in her brain in finding the good around that guy. Now, Seth, I've totally lost myself in the story. Where were we going with this?
No, you went exactly where I wanted you to go. That was beautiful. Yeah, just the story. I mean,
it's this whole idea of getting free from anger and bitterness. You know, Maria, some people might say that Maria is 1 in a million. And I'm not going to argue. She would argue. She would say, oh, no. There's many more people like me. And I've met other people like her too. So I could make a small argument for that, but not like Maria's. But the point isn't whether she's 1 in a million or not. I mean, again, that goes back to our certainty thinking. We're like, okay, if more people did it, then I'm certain that there's something here, something that can help me. You know, that certainty has come. It's possible. But you know, it's a crazy thing about hope is not attached at the hip to certainty. Hope, you just need a tiny little like molecule of hope, and it can just explode into something big and powerful there. Maria gives me hope. She inspires me. She challenges me. She has helped pull me out of 1994 into, that was 2019, today 2024, and to really believe people can change, not just the perpetrator, but even the victim can change to a way of freedom from anger and bitterness, to a way of actual joy, to a way of what I said at the end of that little piece that you wrote. You know, it's wonderful. Okay, I got to tell you this one part here. It wasn't just all the things this guy did, but when her little girl grew up, they invited this guy to the wedding, and they gave him, when the little girl was getting married now, they gave him the honor. They asked him to perform the honor you would usually ask an uncle to be that MC, the master of ceremonies for the wedding. When I heard that, I was like, no. I mean, I'm just hearing all of this in a few minutes, and this is a journey of years that they've gone through. And I can't. My brain just doesn't want to run. Don't invite the guy to the wedding. Okay, if you're going to invite him, put him in the corner. Don't make him the man. What? And I said to her after, in private, I said, Maria, I'm sorry, I just got to ask you, did some of your family survive and come to the wedding? And she said, yeah. Weren't some of them angry that he was there? And I'm like, she says to me, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, why'd you do it? Why did you ask this guy? Well, you know, I'm not comprehending. And she looks at me very graciously and patiently, and she says, well, it was our home. It was our wedding. He's our friend. It's our choice. And I'm like, she is the real deal. She is totally rewired in her brain the whole way she pictures this guy and sees him as a totally different person. And then she said to me, before her statement, she says to me, I think she thought this would help me. She says, you know, because I was asking, wasn't your family angry at you for doing that? She says, you know, when my daughter had kids, she asked him to be the godfather. And I'm like, duh, I can't. Why do you ask somebody to be a godfather? You want your kids to know they got your back. But she says, his family was angry at him when he agreed to be the godfather. At that moment, I was still so stuck in 1994 that I don't give a rip about him and his family. But later, I realized she had healed to the point that she could actually step out of the spotlight that I put her in and put Filbert in the spotlight. She could empathize in a way. Her empathy was part of her key to getting free from anger and bitterness, to rewiring in her mind who this guy was, to actually having a life which appears to me to be incredibly joyful and full of gratitude. And it still makes me kind of shake my head. But that's when, after, she said his family sang her hymn, and then she's like, "Okay, this I'm just guessing." She's like, "Okay, this is the last thing I can tell this guy," and that's when she says, "You know, it's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again."
Mm.
And this guy's beautiful. And that story, along with other stories, meeting the leader of the killing squad, 20 years, 21 years later, my encounter with him and several subsequent visits with him and stuff, have really put me on this journey of trying to figure out, what really is it in us that that can lead to a story like Maria's story, or can lead to a life of murder and killing, like the leader of the killing squad and his gang who killed more than 2,000 people. And I don't know, Seth, if you're going to break this podcast up into pieces or
No,
what, but well, I don't, who's going to sit and listen? We're at 2
I
hours
listen.
and 40 minutes.
We're at an hour and 30. I listen to 4-hour podcasts, and I know they exist, and people can come back to them later. But I think that there's a beauty in the discourse of long conversations because you can learn a lot about a person.
I hear you. I hear you. Um, well, I'm gonna wrap this one up with this, and then you tell me if, we want to go deeper, maybe another time.
Sure.
But this idea of good guy, bad guy, the idea of the potential for good in everybody, and trying to access that good that's there in everybody, led me last January. Well, let me back up a little bit before that. A year ago, May, I was talking with a counselor and wondering about, still residual PTSD, and now they talk about complex PTSD and in different treatments, EMDR and stuff. And I had been meeting with her for a while, trying to unpack, are you really, found healing, and or is there still parts that, need to be plumbed deeper and stuff? And in one of those conversations, she said to me, I don't even remember what brought it up, but we're Zoom, and she's looking at me, through the Zoom, and she says, "Well, Carl, you have a good heart, right?" Now, she's not a Christian by any profession or anything like that. So, I wasn't expecting her to be talking to me by God or things like that. But when she said, you have a good heart, don't you?" I remember pausing and looking away like I'm looking away right now, and then looking back at the screen and saying, "No, I do not know I have a good heart."
Mm.
And that started me on a journey to really dig deeper in what does it mean to have a good heart. And I had grown up, with the idea that you have a sinful nature.
Mm.
And I don't want to get into a discussion or any kind of, debate about people having a sinful nature or not. But eventually what it led me to in January last year was saying, this whole idea of a sinful nature, well, some people said that came into theology in the 1600s. So there were people for 1,500 years after Christ who didn't live with that belief of sinful nature. I'm not going to argue or debate it back and forth, but I'm going to take a test drive. I don't know how long, I just said back January, I'm going to take a test drive with the idea that, within a Christian framework, you're made in the image of God.
Mm.
So why in the world would God put a corrupt core like a CPU that is messed up in this beautiful image of God? So again, I know people can debate different things like that, and I think there's space maybe for all of it. But I just started saying to myself, you know what? Your heart is an extension of love. Now, my framework for love is God, okay? So your heart is an extension of love. Your heart is beautiful, pure love in there. You have been trying for so many years to somehow heal your heart, improve your heart, because you have believed that your heart is some way defective. At its core, it is just selfish and stuff. What if all the things you've been believing all these years is, and I'm going to kind of mark beside me, is a false self or a false heart, a false sense of self that you have constructed, and it really isn't truly you, but you have believed it all these years that it is you. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, that's why shame can be so powerful in here, because when shame, you do something that you know is not kind or compassionate, is contrary to love. You do something that's contrary to love, and shame is like, yep, that's because you're a piece of trash. That's what you got at your core, is this defective, selfish core. So what if I said, no, shame, that's not true. I have a beautiful extension of love at my core. My thoughts, my neural pathways, and my actions, those are kind of messed up at times. But that's not because I have a rotten, corrupted core. That's because I believed that I had a rotten, corrupted core. Now I'm test driving a different belief that says you have an extension. And I mean, within the Christian community, Paul would say, it is in Christ that I find my life, my movement, my being. Everything is in that. That to me speaks of this core. And so over the months, as I, would, you do something that is selfish or greedy, and I might, shame might come back and say, hey, you are just a greedy guy. You really don't care about anybody but yourself. And I'm like, whoa, shame. You don't live here anymore. I have a beautiful core that was given to me. It's not I earned it or I made it. It was given to me. And I believe every other person has a beautiful core that was given to them. Many people like myself were not aware of it for much of their life. But try living out of this. So I'm like, shame, you don't have it. I know it's kind of crazy to have these conversations, but they work for me. It's like
We all
greed
talk to
comes
ourselves a little
along.
bit.
And yeah, we do. Greed comes along and says, yep, this is who you are. And I'm like, no, I'm not greed. That's not. I mean, initially I'd be like, oh, yes, I am. Dagnabbit, I am. So, and then I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I have a beautiful love core heart. I think that the title that I gave this piece that I'm working on right now is the soul given to you. Boy, I don't even remember my words at times. The soul you've been given is pure. The soul I've been given is pure. And so I can say to shame, you have no place here. And when shame says, well, how are you going to explain, what are you going to do with those um, greedy thoughts or those unkind actions? I'm like, well, guilt is going to help me resync that with my perfect core. But instead of me from the outside trying to improve this core, it is now a belief from the inside that is changing outward. That is really helping me to believe that I am, again, with my framework, a child of God, somebody else's framework, a child of love, however they want to frame it. But that love is there, and that love is changing me. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not a prisoner to shame. I'm not so judgmental and critical, because that's the second part of this, is when you stop just looking at yourself, you look at other people, and no matter how horrible of things they've done, if you believe that there is a beautiful buried deep down there, somewhere down deep, there is this beautiful core. You could be part like Maria, after the genocide. It's wonderful to be part of making somebody beautiful again, of digging down and helping them know you are not the worst thing you have done. I love this one consultant, Laura Duncan. She says, what we do matters, but we matter more. Can you imagine growing up in a family that says, yeah, what you do matters, but you matter more? You are not. I am not ashamed of you. You should not be ashamed of yourself, because shame speaks to the core of who we are. We do something wrong. Guilt says that was wrong. That was messed up. Shame says you are wrong. You are messed up. And those are the things that I think are they lead to so much violence, whether it's violence against ourselves or whether it's violence against others. So I think there's a powerful connection. I'm still trying to dig deeper into that one, between shame and violence. That's there. I mean, it seems obvious in many levels, but I think there's got to be, I'm sure there's more research to dig into that thing. So this idea of believing that the soul I was given is pure, really, here we are almost 11 months later. And I'm like, I'm not test driving that anymore. I'm just embracing that full on embracing that, because that has given me I've been through some really hard stuff in these 11 months, but I've also just been through some of the best stuff, and I've gotten through the hard stuff in so much better shape when I don't believe I'm a piece of trash at my core, but I believe that and then the other people, when somebody says something to you that's not very nice or thoughtful, you can say, so that's what they really think of me, or you could say, think about your partner, or you can say, I wonder if that's really what they think of me, or if that's what's coming out of their false sense of self. Because when you grow up living out of this false sense, you got all the neural pathways that are connect there, and you believe that is really the truth. But when you start to try another pathway and you realize that's not the truth of who I am, then I think you've got endless possibilities that begin to open up. And your people, there's this book, I've only read parts out of it, Unoffendable, but when people say stuff and it's not like, oh, I'm so clever and I know you're speaking out of your false self. There's no kind of certainty or arrogance that would come along with it, but it's curiosity. I wonder if that really is what they think, or right now out of their pain, because that beautiful self gets covered by abuse. It gets covered by neglect. It gets covered by well-meaning people saying, oh, that's a good boy when you do that. Oh no, that's a bad boy. And so I become super conscious of the words I choose, especially when speaking with my grandkids and with little kids, but with everybody, to recognize that there are kind and harmful deeds, but the harmful deeds I've been test driving and I am now embracing are coming from a false self. The kind and beautiful ones are coming from our true self. Probably more I could go into that. I said I was going to do a short, but
it's hard. It's a beautifully complex topic. I don't think they can be shortchanged, or I guess it could, but it shouldn't be shortchanged in the amount of effort to explain, because I think after somebody explains something, really it takes probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times before the person on the other side can start to piece together a perspective.
And then begin to take it for a test drive and see see how it feels for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. It's not like I'm trying to tell everybody this is how it is, but I can tell you this is what it means for me.
Yeah.
And this is how it's working for me. And this is how it's changing the way I'm looking at people who have committed horrific crimes.
Yeah. No, I think that it's true. It's interesting. I don't know if you've talked to, Uncle Steve, but so for those who don't know, Uncle Steve is another just really good guy on our side of the family, and he has been for a while coming to a similar conclusion with a different, I think, a little bit different perspective, but he still holds, which you grew up with kind of this view that like it's, inside at my core, I am filthy rags type of a thing. And I do believe, and I have actually learned personally, like in the past, last February, I went to this 3-day event up in Canada. It wasn't a religious event. People running it would subscribe to be a Christian, I think, but it radically shifted the way that I view what love is and what heaven actually would be like, because I experienced just love in a way that I didn't know was possible from people who I would have written off pretty quickly based on appearance in a short 5 to 10 minute conversation, and people who looked very different from me and had lived very different lives. So, all of that to say, like, what you wrote to me and this concept, that, like the inner self is good, and that we should believe that is actually, it's very uncomfortable to me because it's the exact opposite of the doctrine that I was grown up in. But I don't know at what age one can recognize that and it happens, but I do realize in my own journey through life that there is an age that kind of happens over time where like I can look at these things and I think about it, and like you're saying, like your inner self, like the heart, I really see in my life where I've gone and been to like a place where like this is the heart that's in place and this is the heart that's in place. And I think that yeah, we are made in the image of God, and when we're like when we grow older, things can be tainted, and it's usually through the actions or words of others that we kind of, what you're saying, we start to talk down to ourselves, and then we convince ourselves that like, oh, we're actually the bad side of that more. I don't know if I like can fully, like I have been test driving it for a little while, probably not to the degree and intensity that you have given your experience with it and the predisposition and the experience that you've had. Like I think it's given you the courage to really adopt that to a fuller degree. But I, whether it's like you said, like you don't think you have it all figured out, and I don't think you do, or anyone else has it all figured out. But I think that trail that you're pointing to can lead to like a much better, a lot more peace, like a loving life to our, like, and how we view ourselves. Because I used to think that like, oh, selfish people only think about themselves, and in the context of depression, like when I think about my father, I was like, well, he was the selfish man of all, most selfish man of all. And there's pieces of truth to these things, but it's nuanced, and like how I view myself inside. Because there was this exercise that we went through, not to give away too much from this thing, but we wrote down all of the bad things, like being true to ourselves, like what we thought about ourselves. And then we stood up and we said these things one by one to ourselves, like, and they were kind of making fun of it. Like they played kind of funny music, and we're standing up and we're like reading these list of things to ourselves. Okay. And then the music stops. And then, I'm going to get in trouble for sharing this, but we pulled out essentially a picture of us as a child, and we were told to say that to ourselves. And like I'm almost coming to tears thinking about this, and like we would never say that to our children, the people, the young ones. And so, but we go on doing that because we're adults, and we're like, oh, we can take it. And it's just like, it's not true. Like you can speak life to people. You can speak life into them. They can go and murder somebody. They can rape them. They can kill your father. Your father can kill himself. It does not matter. At their core, like that's still a little kid who needs love. And if you show them that love, then like you said, that can sprout into something beautiful. So I'm really glad you shared that, because it goes in line with the lessons I'm learning. And I'm honestly, like I'm almost about to cry, because it's still so hard for me to believe inside that like I can be something good and beautiful.
Well, we tie it to behavior so much. So we all become tied to behavior. Mm-hmm. And that's why I like that one sentence. What you do matters. Our behavior does matter, but you matter more. Mm. And you see, for so many people, that's just a sentence, but this like, no, it's what I do that really matters the most. And we take things and we say, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So like your actions, we know our actions come from our real core. And I'm like, no, I think our messed up actions come from our false core that we have created. Mm. So if we can find a way to give shame the boot, you see, I don't believe anymore that there is any place for shame. There is no place for shame in a healing environment. People will use shame to manipulate behavior. They'll use shame, to get whatever they want to get out of a certain situation. But to me, if shame was to never be present in this world again, I don't think we would all go crazy killing each other or doing crimes and things like that. We would begin to really discover who we truly, the beauty that's really in the core of every human being. And I might go with every creature. I mean, shoot, it's not hard in a dog. We see that in a dog. Dog gets kicked around in all kinds of abuse, and the dog is like this image of unconditional love. And I know you can have breakdowns in these analogies, so I won't go that much further, but I will just, at the risk of repeating myself again and again, when we can give shame the boot, we have a chance of really discovering who we are and what our potential is. But once again, our potential is not who we are. Who we are is this. And when we recognize, because once we say our potential is who we are, then we start comparing ourselves with others. And so that comparison with others is what is so potentially damaging, both to relationships, to peace, to cooperation efforts. It moves us into a competitive mode, which is winner and loser type of thing. And again, shame and all of that world is there. So once we recognize that, yes, behavior is important, but you are more important. So what you do, irregardless of whether it gives you the results you want or not, you're doing it because it is the loving thing to do. Instead of at the end of the day, someone saying, how was your day? And like, oh, it was really productive. I understand that. We really value productivity and stuff. But if at the end of the day, oh my goodness, there was so much loving kindness in my day today. I saw this. I had somebody do that to me. I was able together. We partnered and you start using that as your new yardstick, loving kindness. I think that it's limitless.
Well, we've been going for an hour and 50 minutes now, so I probably should cut it. But we're definitely going to have to do it again.
I'd love to, Seth.
I think that's a beautiful place.
Appreciate this opportunity to talk with you. I always, when trying to figure out and articulate something, always learning something new. And so thanks for the opportunity, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to Carl for coming on the show and letting me dive into his life with him in such a real and raw way. He's obviously a super inspiring individual, has been one of my closer mentors over the past 10 years. And so just wanted to say thank you so much, Carl, for coming on. If you want to check out his book, make sure to do so. Show notes are below. The book is called I'm Not Leaving by Carl Wilkins. You can search it on Amazon or anywhere, and I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Really just amazing book. I could not recommend it enough to kind of have the in the shoes moments for a lot of things that he's experienced. So make sure to go check that out. And all of the links to his social media and things are in the show note descriptions as well. If you made it to this point in the podcast, just want to say thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you want to like, comment, subscribe, review any and all of those things on any of the platforms, it helps to continue to grow this show. If you want to help support it, I really would appreciate it. You can sign up for that at thestupidquestions.show where it says support the show. You can sign up to give as little as $1 a month to help put these on. They're not free, but I do enjoy them greatly. So thank you so much, and we will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.